Part 1, The Red Envelope. The sound of the grandfather clock echoed through the empty hallways of Mark Eldrin's law firm, its deep chimes cutting through the silence like a razor. It was 11 p.m. Everyone had gone home, and only the flickering fluorescent lights above his office remained, a pale, sickly glow that made the polished mahogany desk look like a coffin lid. Mark was used to working late. At 42, he was one of the most successful defense attorneys in the city, sharp, methodical, and unflinchingly calm. He'd built his reputation by defending the worst of society and always winning. Rapists, murderers, pedophiles, if they could pay, Mark could get them off. The courtroom was his theater, and lies were his script. But lately, things had started to feel off. It began 3 weeks ago when he received the first envelope. Blood red. No postage. Just his name, Mark Eldrin, typed in bold serif letters on the front. No return address. Inside, a single item, a photograph. It was grainy, black and white, and poorly developed. It showed a house. No people. No identifying landmarks. Just an old, decaying Victorian-style home with gnarled trees and sagging shutters. At first, he thought it was a prank. Some disgruntled client or a bored intern with a dark sense of humor. But then the second envelope came. This one contained a photo of Mark himself, taken from across the street as he left his condo. He was looking down at his phone, oblivious to the camera. Again, no note, no explanation. By the fourth envelope, Mark stopped thinking it was a joke. That one showed a body, a woman, naked and sprawled out in a pose he recognized from a crime scene he had worked years ago. A case he'd won. A case where his client had walked free, despite the overwhelming evidence. He couldn't tell anyone. What would he say? That someone was mailing him anonymous threats related to cases he'd already won. That he felt haunted, but not by ghosts, by guilt. It was laughable. Except it wasn't. Tonight, he had decided to stay late. Maybe to focus on work. Maybe because going home meant facing the empty silence of his high-rise penthouse. Maybe because he was hoping whoever was sending the envelopes would show themselves. He stared at his laptop screen, the cursor blinking on a blank document, when he heard the sound, a light knock. Not on his office door, but from the far end of the hallway, near the reception area. His breath caught in his throat. He stood slowly, every instinct telling him to leave it alone. But curiosity was stronger than fear, and Mark had always believed knowledge was power. He stepped into the hallway, the soft hum of the building's old HVAC system filling the air. The corridor was long and dark, the motion lights flickering on one by one as he walked. Then he saw it. Another envelope, blood red. Sitting on the receptionist's desk. He picked it up, turning it over. His hands trembled slightly. This one had no name, just a small, black wax seal in the shape of an eye. He broke the seal. Inside, a single slip of paper, "You set monsters free. Now they follow you." No photo. Just that. Mark's mouth went dry. He looked around the office space, deserted, still. But the sensation of being watched clawed at the back of his neck. Then he saw the phone on the desk screen light up. Unknown caller. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. He backed away from it, heart hammering. It stopped. He turned back toward his office, but the lights at the end of the hallway shut off one by one, in perfect rhythm. A wave of darkness coming toward him. Then, click, the overhead lights went out completely. He was plunged into black. And somewhere, down the hall, a door creaked open. Part 2, The Whisper Room. The silence after the door creaked open was a living thing, thick, humid, crawling over Mark's skin like damp fingers. His instincts screamed for him to run, but he didn't. He was a man of reason, of logic. He had cross-examined murderers, walked into prison cells, stared down judges. There was nothing to be afraid of. Except now now there was. The emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in blood-red hues. Shapes stretched across the walls like shadows, and the dim glow made the hallway feel like a tunnel to someplace ancient and dead. Mark forced his legs to move, one step at a time, back toward his office. He locked the door behind him, breathing hard. The only sound was the shallow rasp of his own breath. He sat down, trying to convince himself it was a coincidence. Faulty wiring. An old building. Some sick prank. His phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number, you're almost there, Mark. One more memory. One more door. His hand shook as he set the phone down. He couldn't focus. His eyes darted to the envelope still lying open on his desk. You set monsters free. Now they follow you. How many? He wondered. He had lost count. He opened a desk drawer, pulling out an old file, People vs. Donovan Hurst. The girl from the photo had been part of that case. Her name was Angela Mendez. 23. College student. Found in a reservoir. Brutalized, discarded like trash. Mark had gotten Hurst acquitted. On a technicality. The search warrant had been improperly filed, and he'd pounced on it like a wolf. Hurst had thanked him outside the courtroom with a smirk that made Mark feel unclean. That was 6 years ago. The next day, Angela's mother killed herself. It hadn't made the papers, but Mark knew. Someone had mailed him her obituary, no return address. Just like now. A buzz from his intercom jolted him. No one should be there. The light on the panel blinked red. Someone had pressed the front door buzzer from the building lobby. He pressed the audio button, his voice catching slightly. Who is it? A pause. Then a voice whispered through the static. I remember everything, Mark. Click. He recoiled as if struck. The building's main entrance was always locked after 8 p.m. No one could just walk in. Not without a code. Only a few people had that access, and no one besides him should have been here tonight. He stood, opened the drawer again, and this time took out a pistol. He wasn't a violent man, but he kept it for emergencies. This was now clearly one. His plan was simple: leave the building. Go to the police. Maybe a hotel. Somewhere with people. Cameras. Light. But when he exited the office, he stopped dead. The hallway had changed. Where there had once been gray carpet and office doors, now there was a long corridor of wooden planks and faded floral wallpaper, like a decrepit 19th century inn. The air smelled of mildew and rotting wood. A single dim light bulb swung gently overhead. No, he whispered, backing up. This isn't real. But it was. His office was gone. Behind him now stood a wooden wall with peeling paint. And before him, a single door, slightly ajar. A brass plaque read, "The Whisper Room." He should have run. He should have screamed. But Mark had spent years walking through figurative hells, now it seemed the real one had come to collect. He walked toward the door, the wood groaning under his feet. He reached out with trembling fingers and pushed it open. Inside, the room was cold, impossibly cold. Frost lined the windows. A small wooden table sat in the center, and across from it sat a woman. Her skin was grayish-blue. Her eyes cloudy. But he knew her. Angela Mendez. Dead 6 years. She smiled. "Have a seat, counselor," she rasped. "We have a lot to discuss." Part 3, The Cross-Examination. Mark's knees locked as if Angela's voice had rooted him to the floor. His heart thundered, refusing to slow even as every cell in his body screamed this was impossible. The dead don't talk. And yet here she was. Angela Mendez sat like she had never left that courtroom, like she hadn't been butchered and dumped in a lake. Her skin was waxy, her fingernails faintly blue, her dress damp as if she had just climbed out of the reservoir where they'd found her. But her eyes weren't dead. They were angry. "You defended him," she said, her voice a dry whisper across the icy air. "You told them the evidence was flawed. That I was unreliable. That I was asking for it." Mark shook his head slowly. "No. I didn't say that. I never said you." She slammed her hand on the table, and a sharp gust of wind blew through the room as if the walls themselves exhaled. "You implied it," she hissed. "You poked holes in the timeline. You humiliated my friends on the stand. You called me confused. You never once looked at my mother while you tore her testimony apart." Mark sank into the chair opposite her, his legs giving out. The pistol was still in his hand, cold and useless. This isn't real," he whispered. "This is some kind of hallucination." Angela leaned forward, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial tone. "Let me show you what's real, Mark." She reached into a black file folder on the table and slid a single photo across to him. It was a courtroom sketch, him, in his best Armani suit, grinning like a vulture. Hearst standing beside him. Behind them, at the edge of the sketch, a shadow. Unmistakable. It was her. He blinked. That had never been in the trial artwork. Never. But now that he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. She had been there all along. Angela stood and began circling the table, like a predator sizing up her prey. Her voice softened, more human now. More wounded. "I remember what it felt like. The way he smelled. The pain. The fear. And I remember how I screamed. But you made the world believe it was all just confusion. You were very convincing." He gripped the edges of the table. "I did my job." "You did your job," she echoed, bitter and amused. "How many others, Mark?" He swallowed hard. She waved her hand, and the walls of the whisper room changed. Suddenly, the room expanded. Tables lined the space. One by one, figures emerged in chairs. Pale. Broken. Watching him in silence. He recognized them all. Shayla Grant, strangled, her killer never charged. Derek Bronsky, beaten to death, his murderer claimed self-defense. Leah Wu, poisoned. Mark had found a procedural error and got the suspect released. Every table held a ghost from his courtroom victories. Angela looked around proudly. "Quite the client list, counselor." Mark rose suddenly, heart hammering. "What do you want from me?" She stepped close, her face inches from his. Her breath was cold fog. "I want you to feel what we felt. To understand what you freed." With that, she touched his forehead with 2 fingers. And in a blink, he was somewhere else. He stood in a dark basement. Cement walls. The stench of urine and old blood filled the air. A single bulb swung overhead. On the floor, a girl screamed. Mark stumbled back. It was Angela again, but younger, bound and gagged. And standing above her was Hearst. This wasn't a memory. This was the night she died. Mark tried to move, tried to stop it, but he couldn't interact. He was an observer. A prisoner. Hearst looked up, his eyes meeting Mark's, as though he could see him. He smiled. "Nice to see you again, counselor." He turned back to Angela. And began. Part 4, All Rise. Mark staggered backward, bile rising in his throat as he witnessed the brutality replay before him, every cry, every wordless plea, every blow. He had seen crime scene photos before, sat through autopsies, dissected witness testimonies. But this was different. This was alive. The pain wasn't frozen in photographs or dulled by a judge's gavel, it was real, pulsing, raw. Angela's suffering saturated the air like humidity. Mark tried to cover his ears, to look away, but it was as if his body had been shackled in place. He had to watch. And worst of all, she was watching him watch. Angela stood beside him again, silent, ghostly. Her eyes no longer pleaded for justice. They burned with something far colder, condemnation. When it was over, when the screams stopped, and Hurst had vanished into the darkness, everything dissolved. The basement, the body, the blood. All gone. And Mark was standing in a courtroom. Empty. Mostly. Rows of pews stretched out behind him, each seat filled with a figure he could barely identify, shrouded in shadow, faces blurred, but unmistakably human. Silent jurors in a trial that had no beginning and, it seemed, no end. The judge's bench stood before him, cloaked in darkness. Then a voice echoed through the chamber. All rise. Mark's legs moved involuntarily. He stood. A door behind the bench creaked open, and a figure stepped into the judge's chair. Angela. She now wore a black robe, her long, matted hair twisted into something like a crown of thorns. Her eyes glowed faintly, unnaturally. Mark Eldrin, she intoned, her voice echoing with unnatural depth. You stand accused of facilitating evil, of warping justice, of allowing wolves to feast on the innocent under the guise of law. Mark found his voice, though it shook. This is a nightmare. Angela raised a skeletal finger. Silence. You will not speak unless spoken to. From the shadows to his left, a figure emerged. A man, thin and pale, with hollow cheeks and bloodshot eyes. I call the first witness, Angela said. The man approached the stand. And Saturday, name, she asked. Derek Bronsky, he replied, voice trembling. I was 17. Mark's chest constricted. He remembered the case. Derek had been jumped in a park, beaten until his skull fractured. The attacker had claimed self-defense, even though the security footage told a different story. Mark had twisted the timeline, implied drug use, cast doubt on the victim's character. Angela turned to Mark. Do you remember what you said about Derek during closing arguments? He shook his head slowly. She raised her hand, and the air shifted. Her voice warped and deepened into his voice, quoting from the transcript. A troubled young man with a history of erratic behavior. The evidence does not prove murder beyond reasonable doubt. In fact, it reveals a tragic misunderstanding, nothing more. Mark closed his eyes. He remembered now. The way the jury nodded. The way his client had smirked. The way the Bronsky family had sat in stunned, broken silence. Angela continued. The jury found the defendant not guilty. 1 month later, he killed again. Another teenager. Same method. She turned back to the shadows. Next witness. And they came. Leah Wu. Carlos Dane. Nadia Phelps. Names he had buried. Lives reduced to case files. Each of them stepped forward, recounting how Mark had stood between them and justice, not with a gun, not with a knife, but with a smile and a sharpened tongue. Each testimony carved another sliver of something vital from him. By the time the 5th witness finished, Mark's legs buckled. He collapsed onto the cold marble floor of the courtroom, eyes wild. Please, he gasped. I didn't kill them. I was just doing my job. Angela stood from the bench. And now we are doing ours. A slow, scraping sound echoed behind him, dozens of feet rising in unison. The jury. The shadows began to move, filing out from the pews, stepping closer. Each wore a piece of their past, blood-stained shirts, ligature marks, hollow eyes of those forgotten. As they approached, Mark tried to crawl back, but his limbs felt heavy, as though the very guilt they carried had weight, pressing him down. He looked up, desperate. I didn't know. Angela knelt beside him. No. But you chose not to know. She opened her hand, and in it was the red envelope. The final one. She tucked it into his suit pocket, leaned close, and whispered, "Sentence begins now." Part 5, The Sentence. Mark awoke gasping, sprawled across the cold tile of his law office. It was morning. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, warm and yellow, as if the night before had never happened. No blood-red envelopes. No ghostly courtroom. Just the smell of stale coffee and the low hum of traffic far below. Had he dreamt it? That thought was barely complete when he noticed two things. First, the red envelope. Sitting neatly on his desk, just where Angela had placed it in the dream, if it had been a dream. Second, the smell. Rotting flowers. Hospital beds. Formaldehyde. Mark staggered to his feet, wincing as pain shot up his spine. His hands trembled as he reached for the envelope. It wasn't sealed. He opened it with cautious fingers. A single slip of paper. Black ink. Clean serif font. Time does not pass the same for you anymore. He blinked. What did that mean? His phone buzzed suddenly. It was already 1:36 p.m. That couldn't be right. It had only just turned morning. He checked his watch. It showed 8:13 a.m. He rubbed his eyes, confused, disoriented. Something about the sunlight in the room felt wrong. It flickered. For a split second, the office lights dimmed and flared, and the shadows beneath the desk twitched unnaturally, as if alive. Then everything returned to normal. Mark shook his head and gathered his briefcase, deciding to leave immediately. A doctor. He'd call a doctor. Maybe even a psychiatrist. He wasn't too proud to admit something was broken. But the elevator ride down lasted nearly 12 minutes. He watched the digital floor numbers tick down so slowly, it felt like time itself had thickened. When he stepped out into the lobby, he expected to see the receptionist, the usual bustle of lawyers, interns, paralegals. It was empty. Utterly empty. And outside, the city was frozen. Cars were stopped mid-intersection. People on the sidewalk stood motionless. A bird hovered mid-flight in the sky, unmoving. Mark's stomach turned. He stepped into the street, eyes darting around in disbelief. A taxi sat idle at the curb. The driver had his mouth open, frozen mid-yawn. Then Mark noticed something more chilling. All the faces were blank. Not devoid of expression, blank. Skin stretched smooth where eyes and mouths should be, like wax figures half-finished. They weren't people anymore. They were echoes. Illusions. He turned in a slow circle. The city stretched in every direction, but not a sound echoed in its concrete canyons. Not a breeze stirred. Time had stopped, but only for the world around him. Not for him. He ran. Down the block, past cafes filled with frozen patrons, past construction sites where sparks had frozen midair. Nothing responded. Nothing moved. He turned a corner and skidded to a stop. There she was again. Angela. Standing on the steps of the courthouse in the same tattered black robe, a blood-red blindfold over her eyes. "You asked what the sentence was," she said, though her mouth didn't move. Her voice was inside him. "This is it." Mark stared. "What are you doing to me? You're free to walk. Free to eat. To breathe. But you will do it alone." He took a step toward her. "You're not real." She tilted her head. "Neither is anyone else now." The courthouse doors behind her creaked open. "You may appeal your sentence," she said. "But you will not like what waits inside." He turned to run, but found himself right back in front of the courthouse steps, again. She stood there, still blindfolded. "You can't leave, Mark. You're still in trial." Part 6, The Second Trial. Mark hesitated on the courthouse steps. Everything in him screamed to run, to wake up, to escape this fever dream where time didn't work and the dead walked in robes. But reality had lost its grip. The world had gone silent. The city, his world, was frozen, and somehow he was the only thing still moving. So he climbed the steps. Each footfall echoed too loudly, like he was inside a cavern rather than on courthouse stone. The doors loomed tall above him, open like the maw of some ancient beast. Inside, the light was dim and greenish, like he'd entered the depths of an ocean. He was back in the courtroom. But it was different now, larger, impossibly vast. The ceiling arched up into darkness. The pews were full again, but the figures no longer hid their faces. Each one was a person Mark had wronged by proxy. Victims. Families. Children who had grown into grief instead of adulthood. At the center of the courtroom was a single mirror. Tall, antique, covered in a black veil. Angela stood beside it, still blindfolded. "This is the second trial," she said. "I already had a trial," Mark rasped. "You passed sentence. What more is there?" "The trial of others," she replied, "was the first. This is the trial of self." She removed the veil. Mark stared into the mirror. At first, he saw himself, tired, shaken, older than he remembered. But then the reflection began to change. He saw himself arguing in court, but from behind the bench, where the judge should be. His voice thundered, but his words were warped, twisted into lies he hadn't meant to say. His suit darkened, black as ash. His eyes became hollow sockets. Then the scene shifted. He saw himself in a jail cell, emaciated, whispering arguments to an empty bunk, replaying cases like prayers. Then again. He stood at a grave, hands in his pockets, emotionless. Dozens of identical gravestones surrounded him. All bore the same inscription: "She asked for help." He gave her doubt. He turned from the mirror. "Stop," he said. Angela's voice was calm. "This is not punishment, Mark. It is understanding." "I understand," he shouted. "I understand, all right. I made deals with devils, I got rich off loopholes, I knew what I was doing." "No," she said. "You believed you were doing your job. That made it easy. This is clarity." She gestured to the pews. "Choose one," she said. "Only one." He stared. "Choose what?" "A life to go back to. A second chance." Mark blinked. This was new. Hope flickered, unwelcome, but persistent. He stepped slowly down the aisle, studying the faces. Some were angry. Some were sad. But one, a little boy, maybe 12, met his gaze without blinking. Mark stopped. "You defended the man who hit me with his car," the boy said. "He was drunk. He left me to die in a ditch. My mom said you were brilliant in court." Mark looked away. "But if I pick you," Mark said, "what happens?" "You relive his death," Angela said. "But this time, you try to stop it. And maybe, just maybe, you succeed." He turned to another, a woman in her 20s, one hand burned, one eye milky white. "I was kidnapped," she said quietly. "You tore apart my testimony. Each life came with a weight. Each one, an offer of suffering. A chance to fix one thing." He turned back to Angela. "And if I don't choose? Then you remain in the freeze. Awake. Immortal. Forgotten by time. A ghost with no grave." He turned back to the pews. Then his eyes locked on someone he hadn't expected. His mother. She looked just as she had when she was dying of cancer, long before his career began, fragile, gentle, the last person he ever truly loved without condition. Tears stung his eyes. "What is she doing here?" "She begged you not to take the Donovan Hurst case," Angela said softly. "You ignored her. She died while you were in trial." Mark dropped to his knees. He had nothing left but regret. He looked at the little boy again, then to the woman with the burns. Then to his mother. And finally, back at Angela. "I can't choose," he whispered. "You already have," she said. The courtroom exploded in light. Part 7, The Other Side. When Mark opened his eyes, he couldn't breathe. His lungs burned, panic surged. His limbs thrashed. He was underwater, cold, dark, the weight of liquid pressing against his chest. He tried to scream, but only bubbles rose. He kicked, fought upward, his vision swimming. Then, just as black crept in, his head broke the surface. He gasped violently, choking on air and lake water. The night was moonless. The trees loomed around him like silent judges. And then he saw it, on the shore, the house from the first photograph. The Victorian manor, rotted and shrouded in shadow. He dragged himself toward land, coughing, vomiting water, his body shivering. He collapsed on the muddy bank, trying to make sense of it. His hands were smaller. His chest, his voice, it didn't feel like his body. What am I? He crawled toward a broken piece of glass lying in the weeds, and what he saw made his heart stop. He was Angela. Not her ghost. Not her shade. He had become her. A shriek of wind cut through the trees. Mark's, Angela's, head snapped around at the sound of footsteps. Cracking branches. A flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Someone was coming. No, he was coming. Donovan Hurst. The night Angela died. This was the life Mark had chosen. To return, to relive, to possibly save. But now, in this body, terrified, drenched, unfamiliar, he wasn't sure he could. The footsteps grew closer. Angela's heart pounded in his ears. Memories, not his own, flooded in like blood from a wound, the feel of Donovan's hand on her wrist, the panic in her chest, the way her voice cracked as she begged, as she "Run." He stumbled to his feet, every instinct screaming. He knew the trail. Somewhere in this dark world was safety, or maybe just delay. The mud sucked at her legs. A branch tore at her face. She ran. Behind her, Donovan's voice called out. "Angelea. I just want to talk." It was the same voice Mark had heard in the courtroom. Cold. Mocking. Familiar. And now it was hunting him. He reached the back of the property, fence. Crumbled. Thick trees pressed in around him. But then, a glimmer. Light. A pair of headlights down the slope. A road. Mark, Angela, sprinted, heart thundering. The pain in her side, the fear choking her, this was no longer a story, no longer a file he could put away. This was now her death. And it was catching up. A hand clamped onto her wrist. She screamed. She turned, swinging wildly, catching Donovan's cheek with a branch. He grunted and shoved her hard, and she fell, her head cracking against a rock. Pain. Stars. Warm blood. Through blurred vision, she saw him standing over her, breathing heavily, wiping blood from his face. "I liked you better when you were quiet," he sneered. The knife flashed in his hand. And then, headlights. The screech of tires. A car door slammed. "Hey," a voice shouted. A flashlight beam struck Donovan in the eyes. He froze. Then bolted into the woods. Footsteps rushed toward her. Angela's vision dimmed, but she felt arms lifting her. A woman's voice. Radio chatter. She hadn't died. This time, she hadn't died. Mark woke again, gasping, in a hospital bed. Beeping. Stereo light. Clean sheets. He looked down at his hands. They were still Angela's. He looked into the reflective panel above the sink. Her face. Bruised, but alive. He had done it. He had saved her. But now, he was her. Angela's voice came out of his mouth when he whispered, "What happens now?" And then, like a distant echo, a reply came, not from the room, but from inside, "Now, you carry what she could not." Part 8, In Her Skin. Mark, Angela, was discharged from the hospital 3 days later. The staff called her Miss Mendez. They assumed the shock, the confusion in her eyes, the hesitations in her voice were the results of trauma. No one questioned it. No one could see that the soul inside her body no longer belonged to Angela alone. He walked, her legs, her footsteps, out into a world that once felt so small from the defense bench. Now it was infinite. And cruel. The neighborhood was different than he remembered it from files and testimony. It was poorer, more alive, more vibrant, and more suffocating. Everyone watched Angela as she passed. Some with pity. Some with suspicion. He couldn't go home. Home was a penthouse filled with silence. That life, Mark's life, was gone. He stayed with Angela's aunt for a while. Slept on a stained mattress in a room filled with clothes that smelled like someone else's memories. He found old notebooks filled with poetry Angela had written, dreams of being a journalist, a letter she never sent to her high school crush. She had a life. Not a victim's life. A person's life. And now, Mark lived it. The news never covered the attacker's name. Donovan Hurst had fled the scene and gone underground. Police had a suspect but no arrest. Just like before. Only this time, Angela was alive. And so was he. But he wasn't the same. At night, Mark heard whispers. In mirrors, he saw his face for brief moments. Sometimes, he heard Angela crying, not from outside, but from deep within. Her soul hadn't fully left. She was still there, coiled deep in the body they now shared. He spoke to her. Apologized. She never answered. But sometimes, the tears stopped. Weeks passed. He took odd jobs, waitressing, cleaning, writing in her notebooks to keep the memories intact. The old Mark, the lawyer, the closer, the courtroom king, eroded like rust in rain. Now, he rode the bus. He kept pepper spray in his pocket. He knew fear in the bones. Justice hadn't saved her. The system hadn't saved her. And he, Mark Eldrin, had been the reason for that. And now? Now he understood. Not intellectually. Not legally. He felt it. Every leering stare. Every mocking dismissal. Every locked door. He had taken lives and folded them into arguments, filed them into boxes marked, dismissed. Now he was the box. One afternoon, walking home from a shift, Mark saw something that froze him mid-step. A man across the street. Donovan Hurst. Older. Rougher. But it was him. Buying cigarettes at a gas station. Carefree. Unbothered. Free. Mark's hands clenched. His pulse screamed in his ears. The pepper spray. The kitchen knife in his bag. The thousands of sleepless nights Angela had lived replayed inside him like fire. He followed. For blocks. Through alleys. Into a narrow backlit behind an abandoned deli. Donovan turned. Recognized her. Well, well, he said, grinning. You look better than last time. Mark didn't speak. He stepped forward. Donovan's smirk faltered. You're not, wait. Mark tilted his head. I remember everything. Donovan's eyes widened. What the hell? But Mark didn't stop. Didn't scream. Didn't plead. When the knife slid into Donovan's side, it was silent. Quick. A final judgment. Donovan collapsed. Eyes wide. Breath gone. Mark stood over him, breathing hard. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel victorious. He felt empty. That night, he returned to the whisper room. Not in dreams. He walked there. Through a city that had changed again, buildings bent like old bones, shadows shifting behind every window. The door was already open. Angela stood inside. But this time, she was whole. Smiling. Calm. You found justice, she said. Mark shook his head. No. I found revenge. Do you understand the difference now? He nodded. Angela stepped forward. Your sentence is complete. Do I go back? She shook her head. You don't go back. You become. Mark blinked. Become what? Angela's smile was sad and beautiful and final. You become the one who listens. The one who doesn't forget. The one who carries the names that others try to bury. The mirror behind her cracked. The room trembled. And then. Silence. As if he'd seen a ghost. Epilogue. The news reported Donovan Hurst's death as a gang-related stabbing. No arrests. No suspects. Just another name in a long list. Angela Mendez returned to school. Quiet. Changed. Strong. Inside her, a voice sometimes whispered arguments, dissected motives, pointed out lies. She smiled when it did. She had her dreams again. And someone to guard them. Mark Eldrin was never heard from again. But in a city courtroom, a young woman once walked past a defense attorney arguing a particularly ugly case, and for just a second, as she locked eyes with him, the man flinched, as if he'd seen a ghost.